Welcome to Season 3 of Everything is Learning.
The podcast where we question, explore, and learn on purpose.
We're here to rethink and discover what's possible because learning never stops and neither do we.
Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Everything is Learning. Today's episode is bittersweet because it's our final one of Season 3, and we've had the honor of sitting down with so many amazing people. Just thinkers, feelers, artists, change agents. Like, it's been amazing, and all of them showing us in their own way that learning isn't confined to space or time or walls. It's lived and it's layered and it's messy and it's beautiful and deeply, deeply human. And I have so loved this season.
Agreed. So today we're slowing things down to reflect. We want to revisit the moments that made us laugh, cry, rethink, and relearn the ideas that stuck with us, because there were many, and the lessons that we're still carrying. I use so many of the points from Season 3 in my day-to-day conversations.
I think I'm starting to become, this podcast is making me become the best version of myself. And I think sometimes when you get caught in life, and as you get older, there's more, and with us being new parents and stuff, I think sometimes it's harder to keep doing that deep work that you love to do. I think that the reason that I love doing this with you so much is because it's helping us to connect more, even though we were already like best friends. It's just seeing you in a different light and talking to these people and building these relationships. It's been so good for my growth and learning, and it's made me even more passionate about wanting to be the best version of myself. And I think from conversations, we had conversations about healing, we had conversations about boundaries, we had conversations about neurodiversity and identity and grief and joy and curiosity,
My favorite.
Family, mental health, and I think radical self-trust, which was a lot of this was new. The way that we learned it was new.
For sure.
And I think weaving it together today is going to be a really nice love letter and kind of bow tie on the end of the season. So, to everyone listening, learning, and growing with us, we're so glad that you're here for our last episode together for this season.
Absolutely. Grab that coffee, take a deep breath, join us as we look back at what we've learned and how we're going to carry it forward. But yeah, to everything that you just said, Lane, so much of this podcast has been thought-provoking because we don't talk about like this, in just general day-to-day conversations, but it's really nice because it's like the things that I'm thinking about, but I worry how it will come across if I say it, especially if it's like unprompted. So to our listeners, you're hearing some innermost thoughts that unless there were a structured approach like this, might get taken way out of context, but everything you hear is genuine and authentic. And although we do preface with questions so our guests come on feeling prepared and like they're confident in what we know about, I can tell you I'm very grateful to each of our guests because my curiosity peaks and they say one thing and it gets me down a rabbit hole on something totally different. So everything that you did here was, again, genuine and authentic because a lot of that was not scripted.
Yeah, you make such good points about that too. It's like, so we provide people like a format, like, hey, like we'll write an introduction about you, and this is what we kind of learned from, your social media or talking to you a little bit beforehand, and then the rest of it is really unscripted.
Mm-hmm. It's
I
just
think
conversation.
sometimes for me, you're talking about authenticity and things like that. I am constantly nervous when we have a guest because I feel like I want to make everyone feel welcome and warm and comfortable. And I think Alinne, our most recent guest, helped me to realize that you don't have to have it all together because no one does.
Right.
And that was one of my favorite
Right.
moments of that episode of episode 10 was it sounds like we're talking about Star Wars, like episode 10. But it was like that whole concept of people and therapy and how people don't feel like they need therapy. And I don't mean to be ignorant, but I truly don't understand it. And then her comment back was, please write a book. Tell me the recipe of life. Like, how did you hack the human code? And it was just like having her on was like having another sister. Like,
Mm.
and we've kept in contact with every single one of our guests. We've kept in contact in one way or another since. And it's just been so cool to maintain these relationships and continue to growing with these people on various levels. And Alinne in particular has been one that I feel like if people don't follow her, it's over the rug therapy. She is a must follow. You have to
Agreed.
follow this woman. Like she will make you think and encourage you to learn and be your most beautiful, vulnerable, authentic selves, while also healing you and not being in the same room.
It's everything she said was a golden nugget. And I
Yes.
I think my favorite part, because of the fact that we call our podcast Everything is Learning, is that you can learn to change and no one is stuck forever. You it doesn't matter if you are deep in a hole and don't think you can dig your way out. You don't have to stay stuck. And yes, you also don't have to do it by yourself.
Right.
That you may not have all the tools or may not be equipped to do it alone. Which was also really nice. And I think that she has such a calming presence.
I know.
So, but also that, like, the amount of time it took you to dig, it's going to take you double, triple potentially the time to
Oh,
fix it the other way. Like,
right.
just,
Like if you sweep stuff under the rug, it feels like a quick fix. It's like, oh, this thing happened. Let's just not address it. Let's
yeah,
just keep moving forward. It's in the past. Like, we
right,
don't need to talk about it again. But to lift up the rug that could potentially be the size of Everest,
right.
that takes years. It might take the rest of your life
Mm-hmm.
to to take things out from underneath. So why not start now? You
One
know?
day, exactly. It's one day sooner than if you put it off, because ultimately you're doing yourself the disservice. I wish there was an emotional vacuum that could just like take care of it all in all one go, but there isn't. You got to do the work.
The other thing that was really interesting is talking about boundaries with Alinne. And I never really thought about the history behind some words. And when I say history, I think like cultural history.
Mm,
It's not like in, Webster's dictionary that it says boundary is the line of war, like where your property line is.
sure.
But I also don't know, actually, this would be fascinating to find out that if in Webster's dictionary it uses the therapeutic term of boundary,
Mm,
and what that would be. Because I think culturally, there's a lot of things. There was another word that you just referred to that made me think of it too, where, letting go. And I think there's even a famous book, The Art of Letting Go. I think sometimes people have negative connotations to letting go or the word forgiveness because, or even the words I'm sorry,
mm.
because
Or
the
I need help.
generation or I need help. That was another one. Who was the person who told us
Susie,
that?
man, Susie, she
Susie.
talked about
That's right.
what's the one question you wish more people would ask for help. My goodness.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Susie then.
What's the question you wish more people would ask you, which was to ask for help? Brilliant.
Brilliant. So Susie was our first guest on season 3. She came in talking about neurodiversity, talking about support, talking about all of these incredible elements of learning that we don't often hear from people. And again, another person who was, vulnerable and so honest and didn't even think twice about not being her most authentic self. And it was such an awesome conversation
Agreed.
because of all of the different, you're talking about Alinne and Golden Nuggets, but hello, Susie, talking about, education and how it can stifle learning and how education can also encourage learning and the different dynamics of elementary school all the way through higher education, and how important advocacy is, self advocacy, honesty, and even just like knowing yourself.
For sure. I wish Susie was actually the one on the cabinet and as part of the Department of Education. She's way more qualified than the current cabinet
F you,
member.
McMahon. F
Yeah,
you.
and I actually think we would get some transformation in education, and maybe the United States wouldn't rank so low anymore because my goodness, she could find advocacy in anything. I mean, she was talking about biology and chemistry and physics and like geeking out about all that stuff. And like, she found the best ways to incorporate and weave her purpose and passion and of advocacy in that. And she also celebrated that every single brain is different. So why are we acting
Right.
like everybody needs to learn the same?
Oh, I love that. I love that. I mean, it's so interesting how we didn't even intend on people coming on the podcast and saying any of our like taglines or
Right?
and we we're talking about Alinne who's coming in and saying like just be yourself, like come as you are, and then Susie's over here, self advocacy and just be vulnerable, just ask questions, just ask for help. And it's like all of these things are so key to learning. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think it's so beautiful and so interesting. Another person who kind of weaves into that is Patty Bourne, who came on to talk about her life experience with her ex-husband's suicide and her son's suicide, her son's neurodivergence, and navigating that, and depression and mental health,
Yeah.
and
Was
the
she
vulnerability.
right.
What
She
an impact.
and it was like nothing was off the table, which was what I was so grateful for
Right,
because the woman has been through more than most people experience in a lifetime, and
right.
she's done it in like this super condensed time frame, and like the hits keep coming, but she keeps rolling, and honestly, like it, coming developing into an even potentially more beautiful version or unexpected version of herself, because I'm sure if you offered her the opportunity to take walk back any of the things that had happened, she would rather her son be alive. She would rather her ex-husband be alive, right? But the reality is because those things happened and she did not stay stuck, she probably became someone she didn't even anticipate. And not that we specifically talked about that, but what a privilege it was to talk to her because I think for me, the most lasting impression was at the time we were talking to her, a family friend had passed away, and so
Right.
it was super prevalent about the timing of the messaging and all of that, and we both had spent a lot of time because of our closeness to these family friends worried about not wanting to step on toes and how can we show up in the best way. And it was great we sent food and whatnot, but she was like, just offer to show up, shovel the dog poop, like do
That
the
was my
thing,
favorite line. Like,
whatever you're hoping you want to offer and that they'll take you up on, just do it.
right, and don't put it on them. Like don't
Yes.
say like, "Hey, if you need anything, let me know."
Right.
Like I remember her saying like they're struggling to get out of bed. They're struggling to maybe brush their teeth. They're
Yeah.
struggling, to do anything at this point, and every chance that they have to do something is spent on them living in their new reality.
Yes.
And the just shoveling the dog poop, it was like, hey, I'm gonna come over in a little bit as long as it works for you, and I'm just gonna, she said, just offer the thing. I remember
Mhm.
that's what she said, like just offer the thing. And I think a lot of the time too, and I remember when our aunt passed away a few years ago, that our cousins had this really wonderful community of people, but oftentimes it was like it's almost putting more on the people who are grieving by
For sure.
not just immediately doing it. Like just send the food. At the very least, they'll just end up freezing it. Or doing something else with it, or just show up and drop off groceries. Like there doesn't need to be a conversation or anything. It's just about saying, we see you, we know you're going through something, we're here for you. It could even just be donating to a place in their memory. Like we do that a lot with St. Jude, to remember people. and
For sure.
and I think it all seems so easy when someone just says it, right? But like, I think that goes back to vulnerability, and how many people are vulnerable enough to say something like Patty did, where it was, I didn't want to divorce my ex-husband, but I had to protect my children. And
Right.
I loved him when I divorced him, but I couldn't. I couldn't do it. At some point, you have to decide. And even with the grieving that she was doing, and she's doing all of this advocacy while she's still actively grieving in the first year of loss. Like she is not waiting because she doesn't want this to happen to more people. Like I have goosebumps. I don't know that I could have had that strength and courage if that had happened to me. I really don't.
I understand. I
And
agree. On top of that, the being vulnerable and authentic for her, it's been worth every minute of it.
right.
By it's like her keeping her son's legacy and memory alive, which is tremendous. I also appreciated how she was able to do so with such conviction while staying emotionally regulated. That's something I have yet to
Yeah.
master. And I
That was
know
so fascinating, you talking to her about that, by the way. I was so in awe of the two of you talking back and forth. Can you just remind our listeners like what that part of that episode was?
Yeah, so I talked about how when you're a parent, just invested emotionally, time-wise, whatever level of investment that you have made, when you're invested in something and it doesn't go your way, but you have to get a message across. Like, how do you remain emotionally regulated? Because when you cry or get upset, people tend to shut down or don't hear what you're saying. And she explained about how she had been in a number of situations, like previous work experiences as a massage therapist and then as a nurse, and then in different obstacles she encountered in her life. And she recognized that um, some of those experiences helped shape her and form her into delivering the message with emotional regulation. But she was exactly right. My message is too important that if I become dysregulated, and not that there aren't moments of true vulnerability, but if the whole message is in a weepy mess, no one's going to hear you. Everyone's going to think you're hysterical or not take you seriously or all of the things. And it was, what can I do, or what coping skills or strategies do you have? And it's different for everybody, but it's something that I still really have to work on, especially when trying to advocate for my child and his needs and his supports and all of that. But it was such an impactful moment. And then also her talking about like experiencing grief is a lifelong journey that everybody's going to go through one way or another. Like you can't escape it. And so staying stuck or not, like it's really your choice, and that she had been ready to be able to move on and do this thing. It reminded me of our conversation with Shirley with the big
Yeah.
G grief, little G grief, and like to her Shirley's point, everybody does go through grief. For Patty, it was big G grief for a lot of the things that we talked about, but
Right.
it
One
wasn't
after another after another.
right. But then Shirley helped us clarify what's little G grief, what's big G grief, and hope in grief, which I don't necessarily, I mean, like, I do think people do think of the hope, but grief never goes away. And the hope piece, like, what's your best hope to get past the grief so you don't stay stuck? Oh my gosh, that
Chef's
has
kiss.
been
Yeah.
probably the term or the phrase that I use most since recording anything in season 3 is what is my best hope from the situation?
Yeah, we use it all the
Whew,
time. We use
all
it with each
the
other. We're
time.
like,
Yes.
that might be my favorite quote of the whole season is what is your best hope? Because it's applicable. And we were even talking to another guest who we went on their podcast recently, one of our good
Yeah.
friends now, Needing Through the podcast, who we'll talk about too on this episode. But when we were talking to them about what they were experiencing with grief and loss of their mother-in-law,
Mhm.
we had talked about how in even navigating depression and mental health and whatever, like you can use what's your best hope in any situation, right? Your child gets a C on a test or an F on a test. They fail a test, right? And you're sitting there and they're going through something and they're feeling like they you know their knowledge didn't show or something went wrong or maybe they were having a bad day. And you can sit there and say, all right, so what's your best hope for next time? Or what do you need and what's your best hope? As a parent, you can sit down and say, what's my best hope for them? Um, and if you're in the middle of a grocery store and your child is, having being dysregulated, and you're sitting there in front of the organic peppers and that's happening and you're about to get dysregulated yourself, you
Right.
just ask yourself silently, what's your best hope? If you've lost someone and you don't know how to move, you don't know how to breathe anymore, what's your best hope? If you're in the middle of going through a depression or you're feeling suicidal, what is your best hope? What is my best hope in this moment? And I mean, you and I have been through it in the last few months when it comes to illness and loss and moving forward and even the positive things in life. It can still be what's my best hope.
For sure.
And
Like,
I think that that's probably my favorite quote of the whole season is what's my best hope.
I mean, I happen to agree with you in the sense that it is the most used phrase and
Mm-hmm.
the one that I think is going to be impactful for even how I approach conversations with, you know, my other relationships, my children when they become speaking and my husband and all of that. But I also think like it was her championing the idea that just because things aren't okay, I can be okay.
Oh my gosh, another one.
That
Yeah.
right. It was
What even was that?
and maybe it was like having someone say it gave us the permission to believe it.
Yes. That's exactly what it was.
But it needed to be said by someone for me to believe it. Like by
Yeah.
speaking it in the universe that can help make it true. And I mean, positive psychology and all of those things is like to how much your mental state really plays a role on fruition and what comes to be. Oh, like thank you, Shirley. That was brilliant. And as much as I do love Best Hope, which I do, I also have one of my favorite lines from this
I
season
know
is,
where you're
"Don't be a
going.
twat and Gucci" with
Oh,
Melanie
Melanie.
Whittaker. Yeah.
Oh,
That
Melanie.
was such a great episode too. And I mean, like talking about someone who champions things and like makes things or turns things into a reality for people. You say it out loud, make space, take space. That was such
Oh,
a good episode. And what she's doing not only for people in general as a PR specialist, but for women in general as a PR specialist, that was great.
yeah.
I was in awe of our conversation with her.
Yeah. I think I think one of the things, I mean, first off, don't be a twat in Gucci. I'm going to say it again. It should be a t-shirt. Melanie, I know you're listening. Make it a t-shirt. Sell it. It's $1 million idea. Go for it. But I think the other big thing about Melanie that it sounds like she hadn't shared before was why she does what she does
Mm.
and why she does it for women. Why
Mm-hmm.
it's a women-owned, women-focused business.
Well said.
And her harrowing story of abuse that she experienced from um a family member, and losing that self-identity, losing that self-worth, and then turning it into something to change the world, to change her world, to change other people's worlds, and to never let them feel the way that she felt. Um, wow. I think I may have said it in that episode. There is nothing more to me, and I'm gonna get a little more emotional. But there's nothing more beautiful in life, in my mind. Nothing that exudes strength, like when someone takes something that could have and should have tore them down and turn it into helping other people.
They broke the cycle.
It is cycle breaking. It's it's also just it's so human. It's deeply human. It's deeply powerful to go through something and then try to make someone else's life better so they never have to feel that pain. And for Melanie to do it in such a way that celebrates herself and her life and her journey, and to amplify the voices of other people, it's really extraordinary. Um, and I really admire that and was inspired by that a lot from her. And the make space, take space thing was just, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a great lesson for people to hear.
Well, so in when I think of the make space, take space, and how Melanie sort of brings that to life. So she works with people who I would say are extroverts and introverts alike, and she talks about taking the leap forward, like when you engage me, you it's because you're hoping to get something out of this. And I think that Shirley had, I know we had talked about Shirley earlier, but Shirley had also said something to this nature is like, if you're taking the step to engage my services, then you're ready to put yourself out there, but that you're the best person to put yourself out there. You speak to your purpose, you speak to your passion better than anyone else. And then she kind of helps you spin that. So, but that there isn't anything so small that isn't worthwhile, especially if it matters to you. So this make space, take space is yes, you are the best person to talk about what you want to put out into the world, and what however small you might feel it is, if it's important to you, it's important enough to give it space. And that's where that whole make space, take space mentality comes from. And I appreciate that because the reality is, I think particularly with the demographic that she tries to target women, it's like, oh, don't be too much, but you have to be yourself. Or, oh, don't be too emotional. But then if you're not emotional enough, then you're cold and distant, or this and that and the third. And Barbie, that made $1 billion, America Ferrera's whole monologue in that really emphasizes the message and the point of what I think Melanie exudes in all the work that she's doing. And that if you love what you do, and this was really more for her, if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work. But even if you're paid to do it and someone takes the time to say something, to take a moment to appreciate that, that's very meaningful. That just because, you're paid and somebody doesn't have to do it, like so many people have the penchant to give negative feedback, but rarely do people spend the time to give positive feedback. And when somebody really does do a good job, like they should feel appreciated. And so thank you, Melanie, because that is my takeaway. from that. And
Yeah.
and the emphasis on authenticity and gratitude, that really reminded me of our conversation with Christopher. I
Mhm.
mean, talk about positive attitudes and building connections. His his takeaway, what question do I wish people would ask is like, "Want to grab a beer?" Like,
Yeah,
that's
that
so
was
relatable.
genius. It was. And I love that he also spinned it so that, or spun it. Yes, bent, whatever, mom.
Spun. Yeah,
He spun it so that he wanted other people to find whatever that was. So he wanted people to personalize what he was trying to say
yep,
to encourage connection and relationships.
for
And
sure.
and I think one of the things that you and I have talked about off podcast, off air, is it's as you get older, it's harder to make new relationships if you're not being intentional about it. Because when you're in school, you can make relationships very easy. There's that accessibility piece. When you go to
Right.
your job, there's been this like cultural piece in society that tells you like you leave the work relationships at work. But when, in the past, it was like if you worked somewhere for 40 years, like our parents did, it was really hard not to make relationships with people. And nowadays, I think because of turnover, because of career changes, etc., I think that it does make it a little bit harder. So, Christopher's point of being an intentional relationship builder, I think goes again back to one of our consistent messages of intent, being an intentional person, being intentional with your time, being intentional with your relationships. It's all so valuable. I think one of the other things as a sports fanatic that I thought was really interesting um, was him talking about how sports are memories. That one sat with me on a very deep level to go back and think about all of the moments that um I've had and with sports and we've had with sports and
For
our
sure.
family has had with sports. And it is I think it's so powerful. And again, it's just speaking it into existence. Of course sports are memories. Now it's like, how could you ever unhear that? How could you ever not think that? um so I thought that one was really great. I think his his discussions about and his points of view on career changes, and I guess that goes back to another message of like, you don't have to stay stuck. You don't have to
Sure.
stay in the same place. You don't have to listen to what society tells you. Um, and personalizing your life is so important, and personalizing your relationships, being curious is so important.
Yes.
It's the necessary ingredient to approach the unknown. Like in the unknown seems so much more approachable when you think of it like that. It's just like, oh, okay, like, so if I'm going to start a new job on Monday, what what does that look like? Or maybe you're feeling stuck in your current position and you're like, what do I really want to do? That's the first step out. That's the first step towards what you do want to do, is just be curious about yourself. Be curious about life. Be curious about your relationships. Be curious about really your, like, I think it does go back to yourself. I think if you're curious about yourself, you can start healing things. You can start learning more about you. You can start learning more about how you function in the world. And I think that somebody this season, maybe you can tell me who, it's like a trickle down. Start with you to figure out, who am I? Why do I function the way I am? What am I thinking? What needs healing? What needs growth? And it sounds like a lot of work, but in reality, you're with you all the time,
Mm.
every minute of every day.
Yeah,
You have the time,
you
you
do.
know?
You just got to make it a priority. But I also loved what you were talking about earlier, but with Christopher, like connections are everywhere, and that having a positive attitude goes a long way. And the sports are memories. you really did put it well that sports played such a significant role, and we were both. It was so nice to be on Pav's top 10 of anything podcast again because we this our opportunity to be on his podcast was to talk about top 10 games and baseball. I If you wouldn't mind sharing, because you did that so well and succinctly, but if you wouldn't mind sharing about what baseball means to you or softball and to our family. That was so nice of Pav to have us back, and we had such a great conversation. And between sports as memories, and then for Pav it's Star Wars as memories, and and you know Star Wars is just the gift that keeps on giving. But
Yes, that's. I think we all agreed on that one. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
absolutely. But yeah, but tell us
Yeah.
about baseball and what that means.
So for our family growing up, baseball was the most accessible. I think the most accessible game for us to be able to see it in all of its versions. And I didn't go into that into the episode with Pav, but um we got to go to minor league games and we did go to professional games, but we also played Little League and our dad was our coach. And then we all coached different sports. And I actually coached at one point at a school with our younger sister, and like she was my assistant coach. And, for us too, I think the two pieces that tied it all together for our family were we watched baseball movies because baseball is America's pastime. And those were some of the funniest, um, most inspiring, connections to the game. It made it more tangible and it made the game so powerful. And the memories were just so numerous. We played basketball. We loved basketball. We played volleyball. We loved volleyball. It wasn't that baseball is different in our family. It
Yeah.
lives in the ether of our family. It's the memories. It's the memories of going to Cooperstown. That was another one. Like when dad got us our own wooden baseball bats that had our names on it.
Yeah.
When we watched A League of Their Own and then we went to one of the games with the women who have carried on the traditions. And that was another thing, like as girls growing up, even though our dad wished us to be boys, as girls growing up as, being raised in that way, we got to see women in the sport. It felt tangible. It felt like people we could relate to. Like, I was Kit and you were Gina Davis, except the athletic ability was flipped.
Wow.
And then Chelsea was Rosie O'Donnell and Madonna
And
at the same
Madonna,
time.
yeah.
She,
So
she's having
true.
the conversations with herself. But dad was definitely Tom Hanks. And mom was in the stands somewhere eating popcorn. So, everything felt tangible, and it was going to Cooperstown. It was the history. It was being a Yankees fan and sitting in the stands and learning about all the greats before, and rivalries and wearing the team logo, and like it stood for something. And honestly, I think the biggest piece for me was Jackie Robinson. And that was where I think baseball is also where I fell in love with history. And I fell in love with, I don't know that it's advocacy, but it's standing up and changing the world. Jackie Robinson changed the world. And I just,
Allyship and
yeah,
yeah.
and just seeing how people reacted to everything with his story was, and what he went through. And I know it's contested that God built me to last line. It may not have been something that Jackie Robinson ever said, but it's something that I quote constantly when I'm going through something. I always say, like, God built me to last. And I just think that um gosh, sports are powerful, but for us, baseball was it.
For sure.
Um, and I
For
loved
sure.
that. But it's interesting too because Pav came on the show as like our mentor, in
For
a sense.
podcasting. Yeah.
Yeah, to talk about podcasting and to talk about how, um, his lessons learned, like just remember to press record. That was like his big line. But as we were talking, and again, you back to the beginning of our conversation about how things are just not planned and they happen organically.
Yeah.
We talked about Melanie. We didn't know her backstory at all.
No, right.
Um, and for Pav, we didn't know that he had this other podcast that he started because of his mental health.
Right.
And the vulnerability, again, going back to learning and vulnerability. And I was so astonished by the way that he shared, in how he shared, and the way that he took his moments of being in a deep, deep depression and reaching out in a creative way, which is what healed him and helped him out of his depression.
Right.
Wow. And it just goes back to art and how important art is in society and creativity is in society. Um, but what a powerful, powerful way to navigate mental health.
Absolutely. I mean, a big black bear, that's an easy thing to picture. And that analogy for depression, uh, it sits with me now. And I think that he not only used it to help him feel less alone, um, and help him cope with some of the hardest things that he was ever going through, but he used it to, like, he created a podcast which fuels connection. So he didn't hide it, and
Right.
he not necessarily that he was speaking to everybody about it, but I mean, like, he took his vulnerability, which is really rare for, I would say,
Men.
males to even be that way, let alone create a podcast and share it with others. But what a way to show people you don't have to do it alone,
Right.
and that you can connect. Podcasting in general, whether talking about depression or not, you connect and learn from others. This is the best way to emphasize that everything is learning, because none of our guests have any connection to one another, and it's only because we have this podcast that we would have been able to speak with any of them. And I really appreciate that. But it as I'm in awe of the fact that we have things like this, and that um with podcasting, you can have a conversation, but the goal is, in order to for it to be a conversation, you have to ask questions. And where Pav is open and honest and willing to talk about anything, like the whole notion of asking questions, it reminded me of Sienna, and their whole idea of just ask the question, right? Like, don't sit there wondering. If you want to know, and you come at it with a genuine curiosity, just ask the question. I thought that was so impactful that they talked about that, and that no one had to be worried or ashamed. And here was somebody who has a lifetime of experience, and uh, in their neurodivergence and in their neurodiversity and all of that, that just ask the question. They made it
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, first off, they are just, I think, one of the most extraordinary voices out there right now. Like, Sienna is out there making sure that the autism community accepts everyone. They call out people when something needs to be reframed. They are so generous with the learning that they, like, their patience and their understanding that people are unlearning constantly, even us. We were offline, we were just talking to Sienna after our recording with the session with them. And we were talking about this situation with Marissa's son, my nephew, and just how intuitive he is about certain things and how clever he is. And we both use the term nonverbal. And Sienna very graciously just said,
So polite. They were
so
so
polite,
polite about it. Yeah.
oh, did you know that actually non-speaking would be a
A better
great way
term.
to describe Marissa's son?
Right.
And then they talked about the history of like, well, but nonverbal means you don't know any language and you don't understand any language. And yes, there are autistics out there who are nonverbal. But in the case of my nephew, Marissa's son, he is non-speaking. He understands everything that we're saying.
Especially
He
because
is
he
just
finds a way to
non-speaking.
communicate without words. Like we use PECs
Right.
for it, but then there's people that use AAC devices, and
Right.
there. So, but letter boards too, right? Like, absolutely, it was mind blowing, and
Mind-blowing.
I'm sad that that whole notion
I
of
know.
just press record with Pav, we should have just pressed record. It was
I know.
brilliant,
I
but
wish we
either
had
way,
that.
it was such a privilege for us to be able to speak with them about this because that was a big takeaway for me. And then like them talking about representation and how important it is, and that
Yeah.
even though we're doing better, we're not still not doing enough. Like the representation in autism, which I have since that conversation have gone out and watched a number of the things or read a number of the things that they had talked about. But that the type of autism that is portrayed in media, even though it's better than not having it at all, still doesn't show truly the
Gross.
full spectrum. And then the start of the conversation with their what would the space that you set up be like? How inclusive? How they thought through? Oh, we need different types of seating and different supports and different activities like that. I know they're Australian, but I wish we could bring them over here and like have them be part of whatever department of education that I'm hoping to
I
recreate
know.
between Susie and Sienna. But seriously, oh my gosh, it was so great, and that we really need accountability from people in leadership or people in power, and that power dynamic. And I'm grateful that they were willing to talk about that because it's happening in the United States and it's super prevalent for us. And then I on a more positive note, they also left me with the impression like we talked, and I really was excited about this, is that when you make something inclusive or when you go in with the intention of making a space inclusive, it then becomes accessible for everyone.
Right.
Like, yeah, you might have two functioning legs to walk upstairs, but putting a ramp, you can still walk up the ramp. Now everybody could access it so long as they have a means to get up a ramp. And I was just like, oh man. And Sienna said it so nicely and succinctly, but that
Yeah.
really sat with me too.
I think two of the two things that I really took away from, in addition to the things that we've talked about, is how we can dismantle ableism. I know
Mm,
that Sienna felt like they didn't have necessarily the best answer for how to do it, but they did in terms of how to start.
for sure.
And I think that conversation opened my eyes more to the crippling ableism in society. Um, I think it opened my eyes to the lack of support that people with visible and invisible disabilities have. I think that there is so much intersectionality that I didn't take the time to intentionally look into.
Mm,
And I think the language pieces of how to navigate autism again goes back to, how can you be an ally? Ask an autistic person. How
mhm.
can you learn more about autism? Ask an autistic person. Be curious, be intentional with your learning. Don't just sit back and say, oh, well, this is what I know, this is what I see, and that's all there is. No, there are so many layers to all of this. And I think one of the things that we took away was, um, we had Sienna on to learn, right? We wanted to
Right.
learn from them. I
Absolutely.
didn't expect I didn't have any expectations, but I certainly didn't expect to talk through all of the different things that we did with them and learned all of the different life lessons that we have. And it made me think of Connor and Connor's golden nugget of fail is a first attempt in learning, and how I had never
Yes,
heard fail before as a first attempt in learning. And we talk about failure, and that's another, reoccurring conversation that we have is failure is an essential piece to the scientific method. Failure is an essential piece to growth. If you don't fail, if you're not challenged, you can't grow.
for sure.
And I do think that, even in talking about neurodivergence now, I still don't feel 100% comfortable, which tells me that I need to continue to do the work. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I also know that from Connor, he talked a lot about, showing up as you and you are enough. And, I think it was really interesting because he's so young and doing so much so
Right.
soon. Um,
Exactly.
the idea that learning mentors can be any age was also really eye opening. And that, every person is loved, every person is valued, every person is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Agreed.
really think that that's something I look forward to talking a lot about in our next season. But I'm really grateful for that lesson from Connor.
Well, and he spoke so deeply and passionately. Like the fact that he found his purpose at such a young age is awe-inspiring because I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up, and I'm grown. But the fact that he can find passion and purpose in what he does, specifically in fashion and sports and all of that, but then he also talked about how if he remained true to his core values, that it made hard decisions easier, and like that is so true. But the first attempt in learning, that was everything because um I think if you were to ask me to name some of my greatest fears, failure is one of them. And it's really like out of the failure to like disappoint, but even still, it was someone that's so young. It's so awesome to hear. And I mean, that kid's gonna change the world. He's not even a kid. That young adult is gonna change the world. But it also, especially because of like his current experience where he's in college, he studied abroad in Australia and had all the things. It also made me think about our mentor, Dr. Heath, and our
Mm,
conversation with him
yep.
because not only did we learn from him, but he talked about how like there are for me, the biggest takeaway this time around, because all of Dr. Heath's are also golden nuggets, but it was like, he talked about when approaching a situation, because service excellence, you're required to deal with positive feedback and then complaints. And that when you're dealing with a potential conflict, what may be a question that you're getting for the 100th time or a complaint that you're getting for the 100th time is that person's first experience and treat it as such. What can I learn from this encounter? Making everything about learning again, which is amazing. So even if it's the first attempt in learning for someone, it might be your 100th attempt. You can still learn from that experience. And how can I make this the best for them even during a conflict? And thinking about it from like a positive lens, like what can I take away from this or what will this teach me is so incredible. I've never thought about it that way until he really broke it down like that. But I also think about from the unseen, like we talked about safety in that episode too, and all the decisions that go behind the scene and setting up something for service and excellence. And there's a lot that happens behind the scenes of this podcast that people don't know, but then we get these brilliant moments of brilliance and helpful, fruitful discussion from that. But I'm interested, what did you, like me, did you learn anything again from Dr. Heath?
Oh yeah, always, for sure. I think my favorite, no, I'm between two. So my two favorite moments, besides are actually, so my top favorite moment was all of us reminiscing about the change agents at RIT. That was so cool for all of us to be like, oh, remember that person and their impact, and you know, how valuable our education there was and how much we loved it. But both professionally and schooling wise. But
Sure.
I I think him talking about people's understanding of tradition and people using it as a guise, and he said something along the lines of, tradition for the sake of tradition is just stale. Like, and I love that he used it, because I like it is. It like, don't just say you're doing something and, you know, putting this cloak of tradition over it so that you can excuse yourself from trying to do anything differently.
Yeah.
Or trying to
Innovative,
make something
new.
more inclusive, or trying to make
Right.
something better. The other one, the real golden nugget, was nothing is above or below anyone's pay grade. Nothing. And I was like, yes, because if every single business, um, education institution, uh, whatever, if everybody functioned that way, nothing is above or below my pay grade, the world would be a different place.
I happen to agree with you. It would be
So
very different.
I loved that. I love the fact that, you know, but one of the things we didn't get to really talk about, and when we have him back on, I'd love to talk about it, is just his approach to life is that of service. And we kind of talked about how it connects to us as parents a little bit. I made that connection, and I really thought that was interesting. Um, you know, service excellence, when you think about it, it's almost, I consider it kind of like servant first leadership, which I know is different. But I identify with servant first leadership in a way that is similar to service excellence. I want to be doing both at the same time. I come at people, I come at my job, I come at relationships in a way of, how can I learn? How can I grow? How can I be of service? And I think that service excellence takes it a step further. And I think that parenting has so many layers, but if we apply servant first and service excellence to parenting, it could change the lives of future generations.
Ooh, that's big.
It's kind of cool,
It
because it's not
is.
something that I would have ever been like, oh, let me apply what I've learned in my master's degree to that has
Oh,
absolutely nothing to do with my children.
well, and at the time we weren't parents, so we didn't think
Right.
about it from that lens. And it's so interesting how life, when you
Life's.
adopt a new role, how it changes your lens. And I know people talk about going back and looking at something again or reading a same book again, which I love to do. I love doing that. But because you find new things, and
Yeah.
because of your the life experiences, it changes and shapes how you view something new. So, man, thank you. But this is what I mean about, when do we really create time and space to have these deep, meaningful discussions? And as much as I need a good surface level conversation sometimes, it's nice to get in the weeds with you.
Yeah. Ditto. I really love this. And I think the other thing too that we talked about is, like, even if we just make an impact on one life, you know, it's enough. And
For sure.
it's been, gosh, Pav talked about it. The relationships that you make from podcasting, unreal. Unreal. Like, some of these people I know will be, I hope all of them, but I know some of them will be in our lives moving forward. Like, permanently.
Yeah, because
And
they.
it's because of doing this podcast.
Mhm.
And I am so excited that we learned from these people, but I'm also so excited at who we continue to become
Mm.
from learning and from this experience. Um, I I just find a lot of joy in learning and in doing this. And I think, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Um, that's why I look like I'm acting weird, because I am acting weird. Um, I just am so grateful for like life kind of offering this opportunity. I mean, the opportunity was created, sure. It was a manifestation of like hopes to be a change agent and do something and put something out there to help people. But I think that one of the things that we continue to learn and understand is everything is learning. And I think a lot of this formed because we were curious about how other people were understanding learning and how other people were living in the world and how other people were changing the world and how other people, um, you know, I think a lot of it does go back to curiosity, because I really think curiosity fuels everything in life. It fuels your relationships. It fuels your friendships. It fuels your self knowledge. It fuels being able to break cycles and generational curses. Um and I think that, you know, asking for help and showing up as yourself and living your truth and sharing your truth, and however that is works best for you in whatever way it works, and building community and finding community. I think we live in this really diverse world, and society often tries to divide when it should really be bringing us together. And I think we have so much more work to do when it comes to equity and inclusion. I think the more we unite our voices, the more we do learn from each other, the more we are intentional, the better the world can be. And we're going to make mistakes doing it, but if it's a first attempt in learning, or if it's a 5,000th attempt at learning, um, if we do it with grace and vulnerability and intention, we can keep moving forward.
Given what you just said, this season definitely reminded us that learning lives everywhere. It's in our relationships, it's in our grief, it's in our healing, and our boldest truths. And we've had the honor of sitting with awesome guests who we all just talked about, and who showed us that learning and unlearning and evolving are not just possible, they're crucial, they're essential. And so, if you've been here with us through every story and every episode, thank you.
Thank
If this
you.
is your first listen, I hope it won't be your last, as I'm sure Elena also, we both hope it won't be your last. But don't go too far, because we're already dreaming up season 4, and the next one is close to our hearts.
Yeah, we're really, really excited about the next season. We are going to be celebrating neurodiversity, but also learning more about it. Because there's always more to learn when it comes to this. But it it's about celebrating the full spectrum. And it's about celebrating how our brains work, how we function in the world, how we move in the world. And it's not just going to be about science, but it's also going to be about storytelling. And we're going to explore things like masking and unmasking, diagnoses and identity, intersectionality. We're going to be talking about accessibility and joy. We are going to be discussing approaches to dismantling ableism and promoting equality, equity, and inclusion. We have to be doing that, and we are so excited to do that. You know, we want to change the world, but we want to do it in the way that we do it here at Everything is Learning. And we want to help people to figure out first steps while also celebrating the uniqueness and the beauty of all that comes from being deeply human.
I'm so
So we're going to do it with the same curiosity, the same radical honesty and tenderness that we do, that you've come to expect from us. So whether you're neurodivergent or you're not, whether you love someone who is or support someone who is, or you just want to understand with us and learn with us about how to make the world a little bit more kind and beautiful, you're going to want to tune in. And we really want you here. So join us next season, because it's not just a conversation, it's going to be a celebration. And as always, everything is learning.
Thanks, folks.
That's a wrap for this episode of Everything is Learning. If you loved this episode, share it, subscribe, and let's keep the conversation going.
Stay curious and keep learning. We'll catch you next time.